What's up, guys? It's Rey-Jay back with another video. And in this one, I want to break down what's happening with SPY, Tesla, and the overall markets. I'm also going to break down what's going on with the economic calendar moving forward, talk about other factors out there, such as what's going on with our earnings, which you should be watching for as we have more data coming out for tomorrow. But just know that I am not a financial planner, so take nothing I say as financial advice. And also, if you guys can, please check out my Webull link. If you deposit any amount of money, you're guaranteed 12 free stocks. If you deposit $500, you're guaranteed 20 in total, and deposit $2,000 or more, and you're guaranteed 40. The offer ends very soon in just 3 days. Anyways, now let's talk about what's happening with these charts. So I just wanted to mention to everyone that right now the market's in a very, very sideways range. The market's just trading back and forth, very choppy because it's very indecisive. And we're waiting for some very, very big data to come out. Now, with the whole news involving Israel, I did go over this in my morning video and also yesterday. Just know that Israel did not strike back against Iran's oil facilities. It was just against their military areas. So it didn't really escalate the way many people were thinking. And then on top of this, because the oil facilities were not involved, it didn't really affect crude as much. That's why the market didn't get as big of an effect from that news. And with that point kind of passing, it's not as impactful. We're going to be focusing more on other pieces of data. That's what's going to be a lot more impactful for the way the market's moving. So the first thing is going to be earnings. And this is going to be very important for tomorrow and beyond. I give you guys a warning about this as well. After the market closed today, we just got Ford's earnings. Unfortunately, the share price is a little bit down because of what they announced about guidance. I'll talk about that in just a minute. And then for tomorrow, it's going to be Tuesday. Just know that before the market opens, we have PayPal and SoFi announcing their earnings, not to mention like Pfizer, Royal Caribbean, and then McDonald's and a few others. But the big one is going to be PayPal. So it's going to cause a big move in tech for the NASDAQ, the QQQ, and the list goes on. So get ready for some high volatility tomorrow morning because of that. In terms of our data, there's not really much data coming out in the morning. It's all very, very minor, like retail inventories. And tomorrow is going to be, once again, Tuesday, October 29th, 2024. So there is one thing that's going to be coming out that's going to cause high volatility, however, but that's going to be intraday. We have the JOLTS job openings, job quits, and very important jobs numbers that might cause some volatility at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. That's 30 minutes after the stock market opens. Then 1 hour after opening, we have the Dallas Fed services data. So look for volatility at those times. And just as a reminder, before the market opens, we have PayPal causing a big move. And then at 10 a.m., there's going to be another big move thanks to some jobs numbers. Those are the main times to watch for volatility going into tomorrow. Now, what happened with Ford's earnings? The answer is the share price is down. And the reason why it's down is because their guidance was not that great. So they gave us some interesting announcements. They talked about how they saw some interesting gains overall. Their adjusted free cash flow was not too bad, very close to expectations. However, just know this, that their EPS was at about 49 cents adjusted versus 47 cents expected, so above expectations. And their automotive revenue is at $43.07 billion. That's above expectations as well. So they beat on EPS, they beat on revenue, they did relatively well on those ends. So that's good news for them. However, I also want to mention the fact that just because they did well for guidance, it doesn't necessarily mean, or just because they did well for earnings, it does not necessarily mean their guidance was good as well. So they're telling us that there were some pressures coming up, especially with unexpected warranty costs, other factors like that. And their overall expectations for the end of the year are not as strong. That's why the share price has ended up dipping. So just keep that in mind, guys. That's why Ford is down so far. Not the best for the markets, but it's not that big. What's going to be bigger is going to be PayPal, in my opinion. So tomorrow, before the market opens, we have PayPal announcing their earnings. We are expecting $1.08 per share, and that's going to be a year-over-year change of about 16.9% to the downside. Then we're also expecting revenue at $7.86 billion. That's up 5.9% compared to a year ago. So we'll see how things end up going, especially as they're revising their EPS. Now, I also want to call out the fear and greed index is currently at greed. That's making up the majority of sentiment. Momentum remains greedy as well. And then our put and call option ratios at neutral, kind of stuck in between. We're looking for 0.71 right now as we start to see a little bit of a decrease in put buying, at least for the broader markets. The VIX is also neutral, so we're just waiting to see what's about to happen with all this data. So with that being said, we're waiting for PayPal's earnings to cause some high volatility, then some jobs numbers tomorrow in the morning, 30 minutes after market open. But now let's talk about what's happening with these charts as we have some new developments. What do I think is going to happen, at least moving forward? So I want to call out something, guys. When you zoom out of SPY, you will see that we have this rising wedge-like structure. And notice that momentum is slowing down because every time we get close to 585 to 584, we keep rejecting, rejecting, rejecting. So that's a sign of weakness as momentum is slowing when you look at the 4-hour time frame. And on the daily charts, you can see the daily is looking a little bit more bearish. If we make a lower high here, this may continue to dip lower. So there is some weakness developing on SPY's chart. Now, whether or not that continues depends on earnings. That's why you want to be very open-minded depending on how things end up going. So let me just go over the bullish and bearish cases, then I'll talk about what the chart is suggesting. Now, if we're bullish, just hypothetically, let's just say PayPal absolutely crushes it with earnings. They do really, really well. If we bounce, we're going to be looking for a pushback up towards all-time highs. If we break past the high of the day around 583, we're looking for basically 585 all over again. If we're bearish, you want to see this thing lose 579.6. If we lose that, we're looking for a dip all the way down to 578, followed by the lows that we saw closer to Thursday in the 575 area. So those are your levels to watch for on SPY. What do I think is going to happen? From a technical standpoint, we have this gap to fill down here. It is possible we try to rebound a bit, then continue to dip, but there is a risk of us dipping closer to 579, in my opinion. Looking at the chart, it is a little bit weaker looking right now, so it favors downside a little bit more. Maybe a pop and drop tomorrow. Just to be safe, it depends on what happens with the big earnings and other factors like that, so we will just have to wait and see. As far as ES goes, ES has this gap down here to fill. We're looking at this support around 58.65. So look at this resistance at 58.80. If we're bullish, we want to break 58.80 to turn back up. And we failed to break 58.65. We're looking for a dip back down to this gap fill to 58.50. In my opinion, from a technical standpoint, this is favoring that it's below its 50 EMA. So it might do something like this where it pumps a bit and starts dipping down to fill this gap, taking us down to the 58.46 area. That's the most likely case looking at technicals, but that's going to depend a lot on what we end up getting in terms of our announcements, in terms of our earnings and the data. So it depends on the data and such, but just know that the most likely case is we get that dip all the way down to 58.46. For others out there, such as Nvda, it looks a little bit more bearish. We hit 144. We're supposed to break that. Notice how we touched 144, rejected, touched it again, rejected, touched it again, rejected. Again and again and again. I gave you guys that warning in my morning video. So we're also below our 20 EMA, which tends to be a sign of weakness. We have resistance at 140.8. If that breaks, we're looking for 142. If we lose 140, we're looking for 138 as our next support. So watch to see which way we end up going. My gut is telling me that we're going to likely start dipping down to 140. If that fails us, we're looking for 138 as our next potential target. So I think there's going to be a risk of downside for 140 and 138 as the most likely cases for Nvda. We'll have to see how things end up going from here. We'll see what happens, but just know the risk does favor downside, but also it depends on earnings. I'm just talking about what the chart is suggesting. Bitcoin's looking bullish. We're fighting for 70,000 right now. We'll see if we could break that or not. If it does break, we're looking for 70,500 as our next target. Bitcoin's looking more bullish, but 70,000 is a tough resistance, so we'll have to see if that breaks or not. As far as Tesla goes, we're looking a little bit more bearish because it will depend on PayPal's earnings and such, but we failed to hold above 270. I mentioned to everyone that 270 is a tough resistance. We'll see if Tesla holds above that or not. And what happened was Tesla ended up failing to hold that. So if we're bullish on Tesla, you want to reclaim 265 then 270. And if we fail to do that, we're looking for a dip back down to 260, which if that fails, we're looking for 256, and then 250 is our supports. My gut is telling me that this is going to be dipping all the way down to this imbalance towards 256, and then 250 is our supports. So I think the odds are favoring downside, at least for Tesla. For NQ, we look a little bit more bearish. We have this resistance around 20,550, not to mention the highs up here. If we lose 20,500, though, we're looking for a dip back down to 20,450, not to mention the dip back down to 20,400. So it depends on PayPal's earnings. I don't know what's going to happen with PayPal's earnings. We'll have to wait and see. But this chart is suggesting downside as the most likely case because we tend to hit resistance and reject. We hit resistance here, reject, hit it here, reject, hit it here, reject. So it's likely going to be dipping to 20,400 as the most likely case. We'll see if that ends up being the case or not, depending on PayPal's earnings, but that's the most likely case in my opinion. For the QQQ, we hit this resistance here, then rejected, hit it here, rejected, hit it here, rejected, rejected, over and over and over again. Now, we have this resistance at 496. If we break that, we're looking for 498. If we lose 494, we're looking for 492. My gut is telling me the most likely case for the QQQ is 494 is coming, followed by 492. So I think that there's a good chance we see a little bit of a dip towards those levels. For Apple, we're actually rejecting right over here. We have 235 as our resistance. If we break this, we're looking for a pushback up to these resistance areas. We end up losing 232, excuse me. We're looking at 231.6, followed by 230 is our targets. My gut's telling me this is going to likely reject and start dipping back down towards 231.6, followed by 230. So we'll have to see how things end up going. But that's the most likely case in my personal opinion. For Netflix, we're looking a little bit more bearish here. I mentioned everyone's going to be dipping back down to about 753. We'll watch and see if it bounces or not. Because we're losing that support, this chart is favoring downside for 741. That's going to be our target if this continues to dip. It was quite choppy today, but this is still anticipating the downside. So give this the time that it needs as time goes on. So Netflix is favoring downside for now. Just keep that in mind, guys. As far as CELH goes, or Celsius, we're looking a little more bearish. Why? Because look at the pattern. We pump and dump, pump and dump, pump and dump, pump and dump. And we've been treating our 50 EMA as the main resistance. So that 32 area was failing to break. So now it's favoring the next imbalance below to fill. So I favor we're going to be dipping down to the lower 31s. That's the most likely case. I think there's going to be some downside coming, so just keep that in mind. For other factors out there, we have Palantir, which is looking more bearish. We pushed up to about 45 as I predicted in my video from yesterday, only to reject from there. So now, because we were not able to break past 45 and we're losing that support, I think that this wick is going to be attracting us down to about 44.4, then 43.96 at the 20 EMA. This looks a little bit more bearish, so just keep that in mind. For Supermicros, the same thing. We have this wick forming here. We could be dipping back down towards 47.06. So I think the odds are favoring some downside as well for this chart. Now, it depends on PayPal's earnings. PayPal could launch this back up to 48.5 or back down to 47. But just know the chart is favoring downside a little bit more as the most likely case. For Rivian, we're also dipping right over here. We have 11 as our resistance. If we don't hold above 10.9, we're favoring a move back down towards 10.73, followed by 10.6. So I think the odds do favor the downside, so we'll have to see how things end up going. For SoFi, we have a double top leg structure. We have this resistance around 11.2. Our main supports where this gap is around 10.99, followed by 10.83. My gut tells me we're going to be looking for a dip back down towards 10.83 or so. So look for more downside as the most likely case. For the IWM Russell 2000, we pushed very nicely towards this 222.5 area. If we don't break that, we're looking for a dip back down for 221. My gut tells me that we're doing the same thing. We kind of pop and drop, pop and drop. So 221 is most likely coming for the IWM. For AMD, we're pushing very, very nicely. We're trying to pump and pump and pump towards the 160 area. It looks a little bit more bullish compared to the market because of some bullish news that came out. It's getting a lot of good news, which is why it's outperforming the market. So look at this 160 area as our resistance. It is a tough resistance. Break this, and we're going up to 162. If it rejects here, we're going back down towards 158 and then 156. So in my opinion, I think as of right now, we're bullish, but I think we're going to be fighting a tough resistance. So my gut tells me we could push a little bit more close to 162, but then there's going to be a rejection coming all the way back down towards 158. So a pump and dump is what I'm anticipating for AMD. For ARM, we pushed very nicely to this imbalance fill. Now we're slowing a bit. I think we're going to be retesting our key EMAs of 150 breaks. We're looking for an attempt to get back down to 147. So the odds favor a little bit of a dip. For Coinbase, we're also pushing very, very nicely. We're looking at this resistance at 220. If we end up failing at 218, we're looking for a dip back down to 209. So look for 220, then a rejection and move back down towards 211.8, followed by 209. I think the odds favor kind of like a pump and dump. So look for 220 as our potential target. And we'll see if we get a rejection off that. I think it's going to be pushing with Bitcoin. And then we'll see if we get that rejection off 220. But look for more upside for now, and then we'll see what the reaction happens to be. Amazon's dipping. It also depends on PayPal's earnings. But for now, we look a little bit more bearish for this gap fill. So we're looking for 187.5 as our potential target. We have 189 as our resistance, but this is favoring downside for the time being. For Meta, we look a little bit more bearish. If we end up losing 576, we're looking for a move back down towards 573. And for bullish, you want to break past 580. As of right now, it's very indecisive. So look for a test of 580 and then dip back down to 576. There's not really much going on with this for now. For Microsoft, we're looking for a move back down towards 425. If 425 holds us, we could rebound. If this fails us, we're looking for a dip. So expect a dip to 425. If that fails us, we're going to be dipping even lower towards the 424 area. So give it the time it needs. For Google, we pumped very nicely towards 170. We dipped back down only to rebound. So we're looking for 169 as our resistance. It's looking a little bit more bullish thanks to that. But I think that between 169 and 170, we have a tough resistance, so it might slow down after that. So that's the most likely case in my opinion. DJT is looking more bullish for the time being because of the fact that we are still holding up very well. As we're getting close to the election, it's continuing to break out. So we're looking for a target of 50 plus. The VIX is starting to push a little bit. So if the VIX is ready to get that breakout, this could start breaking out higher, which is bearish for the markets. So as of right now, it has potential. Whether or not we meet that potential depends on what happens with earnings. So just keep that in mind. The 10-year Treasury yield is also bullish because of what's happening with the election. And then the dollar is also just kind of flat right now. We're just waiting to see how this develops. So with that being said, my general view of the market is this, that the market is indecisive. It's waiting to see what happens with all these different earnings. So we just have to wait and see how things end up going. However, we are doing a good job at still holding some key support, so we're not extremely bearish yet. I do want to call out that the market has a lot of gaps to fill below, and I do think there's going to be a big corrective phase that's coming. Could the phase start this week with earnings, or is it going to start later on because of the election? Who knows? But eventually, I do believe there's going to be that big move to the downside where we're going to be getting a 5 to 10% corrective move in the markets. It may take a couple of weeks, may take another month to get it, but just keep that in mind, guys, that there is that risk of that happening. So if you want to short the market, just be careful. I'm the kind of guy that does not like to short too hard. Like initially, I like to give the market some time to develop because sometimes the market could be very tricky when it comes to swinging. So with all the chop that's been happening over the last few days, it could hurt premiums quite a bit. That's why I would say to be very careful with the way you short because the market just has this interesting price action. It's designed to basically, take money from the little guy, transfer everything to the big guys, and they have different strategies to do that. So you want to be very mindful of that. Right? If one person is winning, the other person on the other end is losing of that option. And the same thing happens vice versa. So with that being said, I just want to say I really appreciate you guys so much for listening. Be careful if you're trying to swing trade in a market like this with lots of chop. And basically, the market's just waiting to react to earnings. Earnings is going to be very key for how the market ends up moving, especially with guidance coming out. So I think that's going to be key for this market. We'll see how things end up going for the next couple of days. And I'll be back tomorrow before the market opens to give you guys another update. I just want to say once again, I really appreciate you guys so much for your attentions. I really, really thank you guys for being here for me and leaving such kind comments most of the time. It really means the world to me. And I just want to say that I wish you guys all the best, at least moving forward in your endeavors. So thank you. I'll be back tomorrow with another update to talk about what's going on with these markets, as I typically do. And I'll see you guys then. Thank you for listening and peace out.